Okay, so we're going to start painting our animal. We've practiced in different watercolor techniques, some of which are included here. But think about what colors you want to use, what techniques you might want to use, where you want some texture in your painting. So I have these old examples, which can kind of show you how you should start to build up by using really light, transparent layers of color. So again, when we set up for watercolor, we want to make sure we have our water bucket, we have a variety of brushes, our paint, a palette, salt if we're going to use it, or plastic wrap. We also want to make sure we have some paper towels so we can dry our brush off as needed. So something like this, let's say I started with my background and I got my colors down, right? I could go back in and add some more to that. So I'm going to mix up some watery blue paint here. And I could darken certain areas along the edge. I could even do some fun stuff like hold it vertically and let the paint drip. Add some more water. There we go. You know, and let the nature of watercolor do some interesting things for you. Okay, so I'm going to get started on my actual fox here. Okay, so one thing you might want to decide to do is start by painting just the animal itself. So I'm just going to start by laying in some water on my animal. Before you do this, also, if you want to keep any parts perfectly white, you would want to add that masking fluid. So I'm just going to start by playing and just throwing color down and more water and letting the water do the work as far as blending goes. Okay, this yellow is a little bit muddy, so we got some green in there, but it's okay. And you want this first layer to be sort of watery and light. If at this point you know you want to use some salt, you could layer that on as well. You would need a little bit more pigment to accomplish that look though. But areas where you know it's going to be a little bit darker. And this is a fuzzy guy, like he's furry, so the edge doesn't have to be like a super crisp edge. I'm going to pick up a little bit more red. Drop on some little blobs in certain spots. And that's the beauty in watercolor, is when the colors blend and bleed together. And I'm going to blow dry this to speed up the process so I can show you the next steps. I'm going to let this flow a little bit first. Oops. Oh, I didn't want that to happen. Okay, so if something crazy like that happens, don't panic. Grab a paper towel and just blot up the paint. No big deal. See? Okay. So I'm going to just blow dry this and come back in a minute. Okay, so now that it's dry, I can start in another area. So the whole concept of wet on dry applies here. So this is now dry. So if I decide to paint the background now, that color will not bleed because it's dry. Okay, so if this edge was still wet and I put another color here, it would probably bleed and look all weird and fuzzy. So for my background, I think I'm going to actually do some cool colors. Kind of remind us of maybe being deep in the forest. And again, I'm letting the water do the work here. And I'm not working on the whole thing at the same time because it's a little difficult to do that, you know, as things dry. So here's some little watercolor blooms. And those can be used to your advantage to create texture and interest in your background. So here, like, you could also use the salt or the rubbing alcohol to do some interesting textures in your background. Do the hair dryer, you guys can kind of see how it kind of moves the little puddles around. So that is something to be aware of as you're drying your paint. If that's not something you want to happen, then you have to just have patience and just let it dry naturally. Well, this dried a little bit more. There's still some wet spots, but you can see that as it was drying, because I had some puddles, you know, uneven, you get these like hard edges, and some people hate that, and some people like it. Some people can use that to their advantage in their final piece. Okay, so now would be the time to start to build up maybe like some shading on your animal. Like, where are the shadows in your animal? So maybe you need to mix up more concentrated reddish pigment here and go into by his ears. At this point too, it would make sense to sort of look at your reference animal and look at where the shadows and the highlights are. But this is where you could create some texture, sort of, like in how you apply the paint to emphasize or exaggerate the texture of the type of animal you have, if he's furry or if it's, you know, scales or, you know, wrinkly elephant skin, whatever it is. So how you paint can help, you know, create different illusions. And then at this point too, you could start to do weird stuff. Like, let's say I want to have a doodle here. I'm going to do that in like a transparent watercolor because I want it to be kind of subtle. So there's a little spiral. And then maybe I'm going to do it again